Ahi Māori koutou. No mai haramai. Welcome to this webinar on Re-indigenisation and Peace with Paradies and Liana MacDonald. I'm going to be your chair today, ko Ngaire Rae aho. I'm going to just open us with a karakia to begin the session. Kia tau te rangi Māori e, o te rangi e tū iho nei, o papatua nuku e takoto nei, o te taiao e awhi nei, ki runga i a tātou tihei mauri ora. May the peace of the sky above and the earth below and all of the universe rest upon us all. Behold, it is life. Thought that was reasonably apt karakia to begin our session today, talking about re-indigenisation and peace. I'm sure there's a few people out there on the audience that know me, but for those of you that don't, ko Ngaire Rae aho, I'm he Pākehā aho, no Kaikōrero aho. I've been involved in lots of Te Tiriti-based future events in the past, but this is my first one for this year. And unfortunately, I'm a ring-in for Grant Bergen, who couldn't be here. So we're sending all of our aroha to Grant at this time. Really excited to have Paradies and Liana MacDonald as our speakers for today. We have Yin, who is a Wakaya man who's joining us from Naarm, also known as Melbourne. Yin is a distinguished professor, chair in race relations at Deakin University. He's authored over 270 publications, and his research focuses on racism, anti-racism, cultural safety, and Indigenous knowledge. We also have the lovely Liana MacDonald, who has who comes from Te Tauihu o Te Waka a Maui, from all the way up in the top of the South Island. She is the Associate Professor and Co-Director of Te Ao o Rongo Marae Roa, the National Centre for Peace and Conflict Studies at Otago Whakaihu Waka, or also known as Otago University. So, and Liana does research into land education, Māori history, cultural history, and settler colonialism. So today's session, how we will go ahead is Yin will share some slides, and then Liana will share some slides, and then we will open the, I've got a few questions, and then we will also have the Q&A open. So please, those of you who are in the audience, feel free to add your questions as they come to you, and we will make sure, or try to as much as possible, answer those questions. Before we go any further, we've got a little pānui about our community code. So really important for us to think about how we be together when we are discussing these really significant topics. So we are curious, open and respectful. We make generous assumptions. We have confidentiality, one person, one mic. We speak from our own experience. No one knows everything, for sure, but together we know a lot. Make space, take space, and we can't be articulate all the time, for sure. And also, we don't take ourselves too seriously. The other really important information to make sure that you have today is our accessibility info. So we have Catherine, who is providing our captions for us today. So in the meeting controls toolbar, you click on show captions, and then you can view the transcript. And if you need any further information, there's the accessibility info sheet. And Emma, who is moderating today, along with Fiona, has posted some comments into the chat. So I think, just going to check my list. I think that's all the things I needed to say to get us going this afternoon. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Yin, who is our first speaker, and he's, yeah, over to you. Kia koe, Yin.
Thank you, Nai. Yes, thanks for having me along to another one of these wondrous events. I'm going to share some slides. It's like 7-8 minutes, and then Liana will do about the same, and we'll have plenty of time for discussion. So here we are from the start. I'm assuming people can see that. Indigenous perspectives on violence and peace. So, what is the etymology of the word peace? Well, peace comes from the root to fasten, like a covenant or agreement or binding together. Say a treaty or a contract or an agreement of some kind can be part of that. But interestingly, it is a kind of coming together and moving along similar path, feel to it. I think that's important to bear in mind. Violence, etymology of violence, often used to mean physical force, used to inflict injury or damage. That's the kind of most common understanding of the word in popular parlance. But more deeply, it's actually related to the word violation. So violence, violation, defilement, desecration, dishonor, and profanity, profanation. So violence as a kind of violation of, you could say, of peace, a violation of an agreement, a treaty, a binding together of some kind. So not necessarily to do with physical force as such. Obviously, this session is about re-indigenisation. So indigenous simply means sprung from the land, from the Latin indigena. So that's something that we'll come back to as well. Does it mean to be sprung from the land? So what is violence then? It's a violation, not necessarily physical altercations, but here are some examples of what people might consider to be violence. Property as theft, rent as extortion, genocide as self-defense, so-called. Various isms, oppressions in society, racism, sexism, heterosexism, classism, and so forth. Disableism could be considered forms of violence. Paternalistic care is a very common feature of modern societies, summed up by the phrase, we know what's best for you. And then we have aspects of what you would call, or what I call primal cultures or indigenous cultures before or alongside modernity, but certainly for a long time before modernity. Engaged in things like ritual austerity, so fasting, running for days or running around a circle or not drinking or being buried in the ground up to your neck for 3 days. These are ritual austerities, and some would consider them forms of violence. Killing animals for food, consuming carrots for food. It's an edge example, but some people do believe that that's violence too. Physical altercations, we know of already. Social ostracism, so the violence of social exclusion. What's the deal with that? So there's lots of examples, boundary conditions or boundary cases or fuzzy areas where violence can happen. Or not. Some of these things are not violence, depending on your perspective. So violence is the violation, we could say, of autonomy, of dignity or integrity. So back to the violation. A rip, a rent or rupture in what's called by my mob around here, right relationship. So fighting for peace, and we'll come back to right relationship in the next slide. Fighting for peace is an oxymoron because you can't fight for peace. At the same time, peace is not absence of violence or conflict, because right relationship is not the absence of conflict or physical injury, for example. Rather, peace is the ongoing process of repairing, renewing, and reweaving right relationship, staying with the trouble of conflict, violence, and wrongdoing. So not opposites, more like a Venn diagram type of deal. So what is right relationship that I speak of? Well, right relationship is really about integrity. So saying what you do, transparency, authenticity, doing what you say, which you could call integrity, talking your walk, walking your talk, a no bullshit approach. Of course, this is very rare in modernity, where we live now. Hard to find, especially the next points as well. Considering, caring about, and noticing or honouring, revering the impacts you have on others. So what happens when you flow through the world? What are the ripple effects of that? And, caring about that. This requires empathy and perspective taking, sitting with uncertainty and discomfort, the courage to challenge each other in safe and respectful ways within a learning mindset. Leaning into transformation, trying with curiosity, and welcoming the gifts of failure and the majesty of mistakes. So humility is a big part of right relationship as well. We could consider right relationship as a kind of peace. So principles of right relationship: law, listening, openness, respect and empathy, heart, humility, empowerment, authenticity, reflexivity, so being able to tell more about you and what's going on for you, and trust. Advocacy, accountability, integrity, connection, communication, collaboration, valuing, validating, vulnerability, and transparency also form part of right relationship principles. So we could think of transactionality as the opposite of right relationship, or relationality, you could just call it, as a form of violence, probably the key form of violence that we have in society at the moment. So commodifying and instrumentalizing other people or beings for our own purposes, gain, benefit, or image. When do you meet your commitments? When there's nothing for you to directly gain or lose from doing so, or when things get personal, messy, hard, or difficult. So when does integrity show up for you? When do you stay with the trouble of that? When do you have an outcome that you maneuver the facts to fit or condone via retrospective rationalizations? These are what we're invited to do in modernity. Modernity is a society of transactionality. It comes from a lack of deep kinship and relationality and a hyper-individualism. Unspoken or spoken contracts with each other to back them up when they're wrong, instead of learning from mistakes. So there's some people talk about the difference between backing someone up and having their back. So having their back is support, backing them up is just going along with what they say, even though they might be wrong and they have something to learn from that situation. So peace as a dynamic balance, abiding by guidelines, protocols, original instructions for behaviour in and through the world. The egalitarian distribution of violence with kinship as the antithesis of monopolised violence. So often we talk about the state, so nation states, as monopolising violence. That's kind of a popular definition of what a state is. So the antithesis of that is in primal cultures that violence is distributed. So, lots of people go hunting, food doesn't just come from abattoirs where very few people work. A lot of people go hunting for food. The mutual flourishing of beings in life, death, life cycles. So an equilibrium of relational autonomy, so people who are autonomous but in deep relationship, among interdependent beings free to choose and act while remaining immersed in deep connection and obligation with each other. No command obedience system where orders are outside the vocabulary of action. This would be considered peace in many primal cultures. The dynamic balance, it does involve distributed violence, but also deep kinship. So towards a holarchy of peace, I think this is the last slide. So a holarchy is a hierarchy of holons, simultaneously autonomous wholes and dependent parts of a larger system. Very much how a lot of primal cultures are organized. What would be our relationship? What would our relationships look like without comparison, competition, or power struggles? How would our work feel if it were rooted in collaboration, kindness, compassion, and mutual respect, rather than status or progress or ambition? What choices would we make if we trusted our and others' intrinsic worth? The end.
Wow, lots in there, Yin. As always, whenever I listen to you, my mind goes like this, thinking about all sorts of amazing implications of the discussion or your provocations. I was reflecting that Te Tiriti o Waitangi was signed in peacetime. It was a peaceful agreement between nations. And but my people, as a descendant of the colonial settlers, they may have signed that agreement when it was of use to them, but after colonization, Te Tiriti no longer was useful. So how do we encourage, how do we work with our people to meet their commitments as as a key thing? That was some of my initial reflections on your provocations, is the work to do for those of us who are descendants of colonial settlers now about being in a right relationship. And being uncomfortable is necessarily part of that process, right? And so much for us to learn and do. Thank you, Yin. I'm sure that was just my little kind of a taster, and so many other thoughts and questions will have been provoked by others. So thank you, and over to you, Liana.
Kia ora, tēnā koutou katoa. Ngā mihi ki te kaupapa o tēnei hui, ara ko Te Tiriti-based futures. E mihi ana ki te kai whakahaere kia Ngaire, me taku hoa Kaikōrero kia Yin. He honore nui tēnei kia hono atu kia koutou i raro i te kaupapa o tēnei hui. Ko ai au, he uri ahau no te tauihu o te waka a Māui, ko Ngāti Kuia, rātou ko Rangitane o Wairau, ko Ngāti Apa ki te rātō, ko Ngāti Koata oku iwi. E mahi ana ahau hei ahorangi tūhono i ngā kaupapa rangi Mārie, ko Liana MacDonald, tēnā tātou. A few nerves there. Kia ora everyone. Well, last year I joined Te Awaronga Maraeroa, the National Centre for Peace and Conflict Studies at Otago Whakaiden Waka. Prior to this mahi, I was in education and sociology. I'm relatively new to peace as a field, focusing on Māori, Moriori and Indigenous perspectives. And over the next 7-8 minutes, I just want to share where that learning's taken me so far. So I'm doing a bit of a plug for the Centre and for Peace and Conflict Studies. So thank you, everyone, for bearing with me on this. But I also want to talk about why this matters for Te Tiriti-based futures. So where's my slides? Hopefully you can see that new slide now. Is that right, Ngaire and Yin? Has that come up?
Yeah, we can see them. Can you maybe go to slideshow, Liana? We can see them, but it's fine like that. But if you...
There we go. So I just want to begin by drawing your attention to some well-known terms. So peace and conflict studies actually as a discipline grew out after World War II and during the Cold War. And through doing that, it tied the idea of peace to Western militarisation as a key means for achieving human rights and freedom and democracy. And that framing of peace is embedded in how global North states and agencies and researchers operate in post-conflict in so-called underdeveloped or global South countries. And that framing often reinforces hegemony and inequality rather than addressing problems closer to home. So literally within our own backyard in global North countries. And we're seeing this kind of peace dynamic play out on the global stage currently, and how it can pathologise non-Western communities while leaving coloniality and global racial capitalist violence unaccounted for. And so I think, like Yin alluded to, you know, who gets to define peace and to what ends? And so when I moved into Te Awarongo Maraeroa, I found that a number of Māori and Pacifica scholars who are alumni of the centre had been working in tying, you know, decolonisation and peace together to revitalise Indigenous culture, reclaim language, and advance intergenerational wellbeing.
Liana, sorry,
yeah.
if you're moving your slides, we can't. They're not moving with us. If that, we're still on slide 2.
Okay, that's all right. I'm still going.
Oh, okay. You're still on slide 2. Okay, halfway.
No, I'm not. I don't know why that's.
I don't think it's full presenter mode either.
Yeah. So if you maybe go.
Let's see if I try that.
Slider is.
Yeah.
There's a little presenter thing. There you are. Yep.
There.
3, 2, advance.
Okay.
Is that good, Liana? Your end? That looks
Yeah.
good, our end. Thank you, darling.
So central to the work that these scholars had been doing is the understanding that peace cannot be separated from justice, nor from the restoration of authority, land and violence to Indigenous communities across Oceania. So you've got some examples of some places where these students were studying, or what they were studying about regarding Parihaka, Waitaha, Moriori and Samoan peace traditions. And that was really trailblazing work because it opened space in what was or continues to be a traditionally very white field. And so they introduced Indigenous peace traditions and perspectives, drawing on key concepts such as those on the slide. So the work that we do at Te Awarongo Maraeroa and what we undertake today continues to build on Indigenous foundations by working towards a peace that's grounded in Indigenous cosmologies and ethical systems, rather than just drawing on external frameworks. And we're particularly interested in understanding how Indigenous peoples experience peace when colonialism or modernity, as Yin referred to, is an ongoing condition of conflict, and how that shapes our material realities through colonial capitalism, settler colonialism, neoliberalism, and resurgent fascisms. And so in this context, re-indigenisation reframes the starting point of peace and conflict studies, rather than treating peace as something that emerges only after conflict ends. And with this in mind, we offer a couple of courses that reflect these commitments. Move that along. And so through this shift, we consider that peace isn't what arrives after conflict ends. In Indigenous frames, peace is a practice within conflict. The daily work, as Yin said, of repair, accountability and balance amid enduring tensions created by colonisation. And this approach is quite different to how we've been taught to think about peace in the past. So Māori philosophers Carl Mika and Garrett Cooper and co-authors describe that difference through this contrast of wording the world, which is this Western reality that's cut into parts through language and classification, while worlding the world is an Indigenous relational reality and holistic reality as well. And we could think about this in relation to Māori creation pūrākau. So Ranginui and Papatuanuku were once joined together in darkness, with their children confined between them. Their son Tane separated them, bringing light and space into the world and making life possible, while also giving rise to enduring tension and sorrow. And this separation reflects a Māori understanding of conflict as existing alongside life-giving forces that sustain balance and order. As Garrett Cooper observes, this normative condition creates an obligation to cultivate practices that respond to imbalance, which is at the heart of tikanga. And so, as many of you probably will know, balance is integral to tikanga Māori. And, we've got giants like Māori scholar Hirini Moko-Mead, who explains that many tikanga practices prescribe ways of restoring a balance in relationships because it is recognised that relationships are fragile and need to be nurtured. And so if imbalance is a global norm, any meaningful repair work must take place within that reality. And for Māori, for Indigenous peoples more broadly, this means the ongoing work of recovering and reasserting our sacred, spiritual and ancestral relationships with whenua. As Ngaire mentioned, he whakaputanga and te tiriti o Waitangi were meant to hold that balance, particularly between Māori and settlers, but their breaches remain largely unresolved and this imbalance continues. And so within this context, peace cannot be understood as the absence of conflict. Just again, reinforcing what Yana said, rather peace could be how we live well with ongoing tension and dispossession and harm. The phrase kia tau te rangi Māori, let peace settle, captures this orientation. Peace here is not imposed or achieved once and for all, but something that must be continually cultivated. And this is why re-indigenisation of peace matters. It means recentering Indigenous philosophies and sovereignty and relationships as a foundation for peace, while recognising that colonisation itself is an ongoing form of conflict, rather than a historical event that's been resolved. Not that anyone here is probably going to likely think that, but other people do. And so in practice, this can look like communities turning towards balance and revitalising culture and demanding accountability and justice from the state and its institutions to rebuild worlds grounded in land and whakapapa and collective responsibility rather than domination. So thank you. Got there in the end. Sorry about the bumpy ride with the slides.
That was all good, Liana. Thank you. And many synergies between your kōrero and that of Yin, particularly that need that it's in relationship, that we must be in relationship to work towards peace. And particularly, I think that challenge in colonial settler nations like ours and Australia and many around the world, how we can be or work towards peace while the violence of that colonial settler statehood is still in place. And so and reflecting on that need to be going back again to that being in relationship to do so. I see Grant's online because there's a comment there. Kia ora, Grant. Lovely to have you join us. And his kōrero, and I'm just going to read that out because the process of hohaurongo is a traditional process of restoring balance through the restoration of mana. Kia ora e hoa. We haven't got any questions in the chat yet, so I'm going to start us by thinking is what difference could a re-indigenised approach to peace have on our communities, our country and the world today? Just a small question to start with. Either one of you might want to give that a go, or both.
I reckon Liana has the answer to that one. Easy one. Yeah.
Shall I start? I think like one of the things that we do in one of the courses that I run is that I invite people who are involved in the work of revitalising culture and cultural resurgence, I guess, within iwi communities, within their hapu. So so the idea of re-indigenisation and peace is actually happening amongst Māori today. And so, like, I had my cousin who comes in and talks about the things that are happening within Rangitane o Wairo and Ngāti Queer, which I know are happening and, which involve really collective strategies to ensure that people have access to learning te reo Māori if they like, to provide housing. I mean, we see a lot of that happening across the motu, actually, amongst iwi, trying to recover and repair from, the damage that the state and the colonial government brought in. So, it's happening in many ways. On that level, it happens within whānau who are, actively working to ensure that their reo is happening. But for mainstream kind of sites or institutions, those places would look so different if we were doing the work that we've been talking about in terms of returning to a balanced state. I'm working in a university. I know that there are moves to make that happen, but yeah, it's a real tension there between, the stuff that's been introduced through colonialism and modernity and what we as Indigenous people and Māori are trying to achieve. I'll stop there and let Ian chip in.
Kia ora, Liana. Over to
What
you.
was the question again?
What difference could a re-indigenised approach to peace have on our communities, our country, and the world today?
Re-indigenised approach to peace. Well, it's a totally different approach. So it'll have huge transformative impacts when you're working towards peace from a kinship perspective, a deep relationality. There's a question from Heather about this: kinship and collective peacemaking. Yeah, it's a localized, networked type of relationship-based activity. So it's not states making peace with each other. It's not peace by law and order. It's peace by coming into connection with each other's needs and inclinations and capacities and concerns, and that friction that happens between us is a kind of a powerful way of growing. It's sort of growth through, when we rub against each other, we shed our skin and we grow bigger, like a snake. I hear you don't have a lot of snakes over that way, but that's what snakes do. And that's what we can do through this re-indigenising of peace and conflict, which are not opposites, of course. So there's a question about that from Heather. There's another question about how do we create spaces to share conflicting, and that's it, same answer. Safe enough spaces happen when people are in relation to each other. So kinship, kindling kinship with the cosmos and with each other. And that's based on care and respect, compassion, and also our own capacity to have insight into dynamics that we are exhibiting in the world. And it's a kind of hard for people who are used to more individual individuality-based approaches to life, it's hard to learn these skills. But it can be done. Yeah.
Liana, there was a couple of questions that Yin has summarized, well, answered. But I'll just ask you if you've got any further thoughts. Avril Bell says, thank you for your wonderful thoughts, important topic. At an event in Taranaki last year, the discussion, how can we, Māori and Pākehā, create spaces in which we can share our conflicting historical stories and obviously also hear each other's stories. This feels like a related question to your thoughts about peace. Any thoughts from you?
Oh, that's a really excellent question, and it's a challenging question, and I guess one that's plagued me as well in the work that I've done around the New Zealand wars and difficult histories or contested histories. I think, education and schooling is a really good place to start in terms of introducing those conflicting historical stories. And I really feel like we were on track with the Aotearoa New Zealand Histories curriculum, which then merged into Te Ao Tangata, which is a social studies curriculum. And, that barely got, floated, really. I mean, it's still out there and teachers can still opt to teach it, but the new government, is going to put that to the side, not the new government, the coalition government that we've currently got. But yeah, there were just brilliant opportunities to learn from community members so that those sort of previously or traditionally marginalised stories got more airtime, and you got to hear from people who you wouldn't usually get to hear from in a traditional classroom setting. So, I mean, if we can really get on board and, change the government and vote that curriculum back in, we've got a starting point there to work from. In terms of, adults, it's a hard one. I really do think that the older generation, my generation and older, are open to hearing those stories, obviously more than ever before. And now being down the bottom of Te Tauihu, you've got much larger numbers of non-Māori here, Pākehā. And I've met a number who are really keen to listen and learn, but we need to create a platform and opportunities for that to happen, to bring those people in. Because if you can capture the people who are sort of sitting on the margins, who are curious and interested, and start with that lot first, then, hopefully that will start to build momentum to then go out further to the more resistant folk that don't want to hear. So, that sort of cascading effect could be one way. I think vulnerability is really important too. I found that, I like to tell stories too when I was looking at the New Zealand wars and sort of bring my own perspective and my own journey into those stories. And I think the more that we can locate ourselves within these broader historical narratives, the more that we're modelling how they're actually impacting us today. Because a lot of rhetoric is around, it's all happened in the past and it doesn't affect me now. But, we know that that's not true, that hugely impacts everything we do in society today. So I find that is quite a helpful strategy in terms of being vulnerable. And, even listening to you before, Ngaire, just, talking about the tensions that you grapple with, the more we hear Pākehā actually say that out loud, I think the better it is for that sort of broader challenge. So those are some thoughts, but yeah, that's a really big conundrum that we should wānanga more about.
Kia ora. Thank you. Thank you, Liana. Thank you, Yin. Yin, I see you are answering some of the questions. I see that Yin has answered some of the questions in the chat, but I think the question from Grant, around, if we might just want to kind of kōrero to that a little bit. Grant says, we appear not to have advanced, we, as in the royal we, appear not to have advanced our moral or ethical credentials since before the times of Jesus Christ, maybe even further back. Is the human condition fatally flawed, or is there hope for us by honouring Indigenous relationality practices? I see, and I know you've put your answer in there, Yin, but I wondered if you wanted to have any, kōrero, further kōrero, and also an opportunity for Liana to add.
I reckon we'll hear from Liana, first on that, since I already put a response in.
Look for the question on the Q&A. Oh no, it's answered. Okay.
Yes, I just worked that out too, Liana.
I don't think the human condition is fatally flawed, but I can see how, you would feel that, particularly in these times.
Yes.
I do sort of, I battle with what we have to do to live our lives on a daily basis is we have to engage with coloniality and modernity. Like, it's almost something we can't escape. And then, we try in our own wee way to reconnect with our culture if that's what we want to do, or try to act with integrity in terms of our interpersonal relationships with each other. But inevitably, I feel like we're compromised in different ways just through, like, working in a government institution or a university, for example. So, I can see that that's a real question, a real tension, being that the human condition is fatally flawed. However, I do want to draw us back to the work that is happening in Māori communities, imperfect as it is. There is the opportunity to really see tikanga in action, if not in the spaces that you create in your day-to-day lives with your whānau, with your hapu, but, you do get to see ways of engaging in a way that can offer a more balanced state of existence. And I just hope that if we, are able to recognise, I guess, those spaces that hold promise for everyone, then, we can start to think more purposefully about directing our energies to those places rather than persisting with colonial frameworks. So I guess it's, where we put our energies, how we spend our time, and I would hope, like Te Awarongo Maraeroa, that's where we go in terms of our research focus as well, in terms of really looking at, attracting students, and we're starting to attract some students who are looking at how there are practices which attend more closely to balance how they're working in certain places. So, I think I still have hope, but I understand where that question is coming from, and it's a hard one.
Kia ora, Liana. Yin, any further thoughts from you?
It's an interesting question. The thing is that where we're living in now, in modernity, which the conditions for which started to emerge about 10,000 years ago, 10 to 12,000 years ago, this is a blip in human history. Hopefully, if we don't manage to kill our species off through our stupidity, because we've been around for 200 to 330,000 years, depending on exactly how you define what's a species. And 10,000 years is not very long. Modernity is coming to an end. Won't be long now. Stay tuned. And we'll go back to primal ways of operating. So it's not that there isn't hope. It's just the most likely outcome is that we will relearn what our ancestors knew and understand that our ancestors always were and always will be wiser than us.
In these days, with all the war that is going on in the world, and particularly it can feel a little bit, over here on the other side of the world, and in Australia, and that it is far away, but of course we have our own issues of violence, the ongoing violence that's enacted daily. But thinking about the world at war, any wisdom about what people can do right now in this moment, to work or to work towards peace, to be at peace, to
Well, can I start? Like, for Indigenous peoples, before you even sort of talk about peace in many ways, we've got to talk about justice and about how we can build this justice as a collective. And I'm talking here about the current government structure that we have in place in Aotearoa. We're not going to get anywhere with the current government. It's taking us taking us down that road of modernity exploding. So I think we can be vocal about changing the government. We can be vocal about what we demand for our communities and for our children. Social media, it's a double-edged sword. It's lots of ills associated with it, but it's a really good way for us as Indigenous people to collectively band together, to support each other, to amplify, the issues that are important to us as Indigenous people today, which can lead to, potentially changing this current government too, or going well. And so, yeah, you've got that sort of political platform that we can challenge. I think too, being mindful of our interpersonal relations, being mindful of the land who we working on, again, drawing attention back to where I currently work at, Otago Whakaihu Waka. We have 3 runaka here, and so amplifying what they want in terms of sovereignty and political interests. And that's actually quite hard, when you're not from this area, and there's a lot of Māori who aren't from this rohe. You've got to deal with, those bigger questions about being Māori, as a collective, but then also we've got to recognise whose land we're on and support the people here and advance what they need. So there's, totally different levels of work, of mahi that you can be doing, those within your whānau, those within your workplace, and those more broadly. It's one way of responding to that.
Kia ora, Liana. Ian, any thoughts?
Yes. So I would say what's missing usually from those levels, more than not, is people engaging with their sphere of influence, their actual relationships that they have. So coming into right relationship is a very personal, localized type of thing, and I would encourage people to take it as a daily practice, because we're all interacting with others, humans, non-humans, more than humans, in our daily life. So how can we come into right relationship, and how are we not in that right relationship? How are we complicit in colonial mentalities? This to me is more important than, for example, trying to overthrow governments or telling someone, ranting on Facebook about something happening on the other side of the world, and they should really do this and that. It's not about they. It come back here. It's about you.
Yeah, the work that we need to do on ourselves first. Yeah, absolutely. We have no. I think there and kind of connected to that, Yin and Liana, and there was you've simply answered it in the chat there, Yin, but M. Symes talks about that how we stay in what are your thoughts on how to stay in relationship enough to have the conversations, and what questions might we ask to make folk think about a new frame of thinking?
What questions might we ask
Mm,
for people to think about a new frame?
mm,
Well, the problem with questions is they're very colonial, and so are answers.
Mm,
So I would do less of questions and answers and more of showing and demonstrating and emulating and modeling. So paying attention, giving people a chance to see how it works from what you do. So not what you're asking about, but what you actually do. How do you flow through the world? What ripples do you
mm,
create? And who's washed with the waters of your ripples, and what effect does that have? So
mm,
it's really that motto from Nike, just do it and pay attention. And be willing to have dialogue with people, of course, but it's not the first thing to go to. It's probably more gardening, like Heather was saying.
mhm.
yeah.
Yeah. And just building on that, I agree. It's not just a question and answer transactional kind of situation, like getting together and discussing an issue or a problem until there is, if not consensus and an understanding about where people are coming from and an agreement to move forward productively, like wānanga, like talanoa, in those sorts of traditional ways that we, worked conflict, I guess. That can be a really healthy way, not trying to move past an issue too quickly and then, leaving people behind or people feeling like the issue, they haven't been heard, I guess.
Mm,
Yes, to be heard and to be seen as well,
mm,
and to be danced with at night in the moonlight. This is what relationality is about. It's not all talking.
yeah. It's how we be in the world.
Mm.
Yeah. Nice. Lots to think. I'm just going to check if we've got anything in the chat. Um, I have been looking at the Q&A, but just in case there's something in the chat. Heather is saying Yin's online course is very interesting. Lots to ponder with folk from all over. We've only got yeah. Thank you, Emma. She's been putting some of the comments into our chat as well. I can see one of my mates from Network Waitangi Whangarei is putting a pānui out for our mahi that we're doing on the Treaty and Me coming up in Whangarei later on this year. And a lot of our focus in the Pākehā Treaty Network movement is to talk about our history and encouraging people to learn about their history, our history. In the final few minutes that we've got, Liana or Yin, any kind of other comments or thoughts that you wanted to share with people?
I just think there's a lot of work out there already, not only just from an academic perspective, but what's online in terms of magazines like I Tangata, that talk to this idea of balance. I mean, they might not use the word peace peace, peace might not be the word that's used, but if we think about the sort of bringing another cultural lens to the idea of peace, I think there's lots of stuff out there, lots of conversations that are going on that are grappling with these kinds of questions. So, I think just need to reframe what we mean by peace, and that's a good point. Yeah.
Yes, we need to rethink it all. We need to rethink the whole notion of peace, violence, conflict, and bring it into through a kinship relational lens, so that we can learn how to get along with each other. Not through a kind of, like I said, it's not about command obedience systems. It's not about some sort of third party keeping us in line. And people often say, well, we have to solve the global problems at a global scale. You know, when will the United Nations get enough power to sort all this out? And I'm like, nah, that's not how it works. No, it happens between individuals at the local level. Global problems can be solved at the local level, whereas local level problems cannot be solved at the global level. So that's something to bear in mind.
Such a good invitation, Yin and Liana, to invite action, to invite being, doing, and for us all to reflect on how we are and be, and what is our contribution. What is the thing that we are to do? So thank you both for that. I think it's a reminder, isn't it, that it's not out there, it's in here, that that we always have to start. Yeah. I actually think that's probably a nice place to bring us to an end. I am really grateful that that Grant asked me to fill in for him. So I see he's still online, so that's a good sign, and I'm glad that he is connected. Apparently there's a book on the way, Yin. You want to do a shout out for that?
It's a bit early for that, but come to my online course and I'll tell you about the book that's not quite finished.
Awesome. Any further shout outs from you, Liana, and about your courses? Anything?
No, I've got a book on the way. It's coming out in
Oh.
May. It's called Settler Fantasies and How to Deconstruct Them, and it's with BWB. So it's kind of cool because it's a big deal for me. So please check it out.
Yeah, that is a big deal, Liana. Congratulations. That's awesome. I will definitely keep an eye out for it. So thank you. On the screen, you will see their team, that we've got a whole lot of people that have supported Te Tiriti-based futures, and just a big shout out to all of those community groups, 65 partner organisations. I know some of the people that have been involved in this work, and it's definitely starts a year out. So just a big mihi to everybody that's involved in Te Tiriti-based futures. It's a epic week of learning and education, but mostly biggest thanks to Liana and Yin for your time today, for your deep thinking and your willingness to share that whakaaro with us all. So ngā mihi nui kia koutou, and I am going to close with karakia. Mā te whakapono, mā te tumanako, mā te tiro, mā te whakarongo, mā te mahitahe, mā te whakamōmore, mā te aroha, ka taea a mātou. By believing and trusting, by having faith and hope, by looking and searching, by listening and hearing, by working and striving together, by sheer desire and determination, by all being done with compassion, we will succeed. Mauri ora koutou, ngā mihi.